Okay. In the last class, I remember we had looked at the whole of the menstruation or the menstrual cycle, and we had looked at different phases, specifically the menstrual phase, follicular phase, ovulatory phase, and the luteal phase. And we had looked at the details in terms of this graph as well. We had looked at what happens to the oocyte, then what happens to the different levels of hormones, that is LH, luteinizing hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, estrogens, and the progesterone, and with respect to the endometrium wall. So I assume this part was simpler and I will not be repeating it here again. And I will directly move over to the next part, that is the hormonal control during the menstrual cycle. Now, again, some of this we had already covered, so we might just go a little fast at that particular point. So, majorly, these three sets of hormones control these cyclic changes in the non-pregnant females. Like what it ultimately means is the hormonal control, the three sets of hormones, they will control the menstruation cycle when a particular female is not pregnant. Yeah. Obviously, when she becomes pregnant, there are few additional sets of hormones. So that's why it is specifically mentioning in case of non-pregnant female. That is ovarian hormones. First one, first type. Second type is gonadotropic hormones. And the third type of out of these three sets, that is gonadotropin releasing hormones. So ovarian hormones, it's like a stepwise, you have first set of hormone. To make the first set of hormones functional, you have second set of hormones, and to have second set of hormones functional, you have third set of hormones. So that's how it functions actually. So ovarian hormones, these are the estrogens and progesterone, and the secretion is under the control of the gonads as in either the now here in this case it's only ovary, but otherwise it would have been also the testis in case of me, that is only the estrogen. Progesterone is I assume it's not present in the males at all. uh, so these are the ovarian hormones, and we had seen in terms of their functions here what happens to estrogen, which is responsible for like increasing the thickness of the endometrium in the first proliferative phase. So, and also it is responsible for the follicular generation, that is from the primary oocyte to the secondary oocyte until the ovulation, and then it drops off. That is the estrogen. Progesterone is required for maintaining the corpus luteum and the pregnancy during the luteal phases and later as well. So these are the functions in brief of the ovarian hormones, because they are secreted by the follicular cells and this by the corpus luteum, which is part of the ovary as such, and that's why they are ovarian hormones. Also they act on those organs itself. Now, these ovarian hormones, they are kind of in control with the gonadotropic hormone, that is LH. Sorry, this is LH, not LS. That is luteinizing hormone, and what is also called as the follicle stimulating hormone. So, these two hormones, they are known as gonadotropic. And they are secreted by the adenohypophysis, or also called as anterior pituitary gland. They will control the secretion of the ovarian hormones, that is estrogen and progesterone, and also the gonadotropin releasing hormone. This will also control the gonadotropin releasing hormone. Now, gonadotropin releasing hormone, they are luteinizing hormone releasing hormone. So, this is again a group of hormone which includes your LH, RH, that is the hormone which will allow the luteinizing hormone to get released or to get secreted. And the second one is follicle stimulating hormone releasing hormone, that is this gonadotropin hormone, which is specifically related to FSH. will allow FSH to get released from the gonads, or sorry, from the anterior pituitary. So like that's how they are interconnected with each other. It's like one hormone will get secreted, it will cause the secretion of the second hormone, and that second hormone will cause the secretion of the third hormone. So that's how they are in sequence. So
I'm a little confused. For gonadotropic hormones, it says they control ovarian hormones and gonadotropin releasing hormones.
correct.
But for gonadotropin releasing hormones, it says are luteinizing hormone releasing hormone.
So in short, this is, let's say, a grandfather gonadotropic hormones. Sorry, this will be the grandfather gonadotropin releasing hormone, which will allow this first generation, that is the gonadotropic hormones, to get released. That is LH and FSH. LH and FSH will in turn allow the release of estrogen and progesterone. So that's how it functions. Yeah. So luteinizing hormone releasing hormone and the follicle stimulating hormone releasing hormone, they will allow the secretion of LH and FSH respectively. And these ones in combination, mostly it is LH, sorry, FSH is mostly for that follicle stimulating hormone, which acts on the follicle cell, and then it will cause the estrogen secretion. LH is more required in the synthesis of the corpus luteum, and that's how it will allow the secretion of the progesterone. So that's a progression. So this is the main hormone which allow the secretion of LH and FSH, which will allow the secretion of estrogen and progesterone. Yeah, statement might be confusing, I feel, but that's the sequence. Is that clear, Akshay?
Yeah, so the gonadotropic hormones do not control the gonadotropic releasing hormones.
Actually they do, and the reason why the statement is given there is, let's say, see here it is given that let's say pituitary hormone.
Is it like a positive feedback mechanism?
Correct, that is what it is
yeah
about.
okay, then I got it.
It's also act in a negative sense, but also act in a positive sense. So that is why if you see, like, this will cause blocking of this will also cause blocking of the hypothalamus to secrete this. So depending on how much level of this LH and FSH as well as this is present, that will get blocked or secreted accordingly. So that is the main like, but like what I said earlier, GnRH is sitting on the top, which will allow secretion of LH and FSH, which will in turn allow the secretion of estrogen and progesterone. So if there is no GnRH, in short, and let's say that's the only straight pathway, then these other hormones may not get secreted. Obviously body has secondary pathways to allow these secretions to happen if GnRH is not functional, but that does not usually happen. So during, yeah.
So, like the cycle, it's a positive feedback mechanism if GnRH concentration is high, and negative if GnRH concentration is low.
Sorry, come again.
If you see the diagram on the other page,
can we finish this and then we'll come back to this?
Oh, okay, yeah, okay.
We'll just go over this part and then we'll come back to the diagram, because I guess we have this other diagram as well which explains something, and there is one more as well, so we'll go there. So during the menstrual phase, the level of estrogen and progesterone falls considerably. Like menstrual phase it is talking about. Obviously corpus luteum has degraded, it has shifted to it has become a corpus albicans, so progesterone level will be low. Estrogen, because the follicles they have already formed, the ovule has been released on the 14th day, so there is no need of estrogen anymore. So obviously during the menstrual phase it will be dropped, and again it will start in the next phase. So this induces adenohypophysis, that is the anterior pituitary, to secrete FSH and LH. So that is, once the menstrual phase is over, and these levels are down, this will in turn activate the adenohypophysis to secrete FSH and LH. And then the secretion of estrogen and later the progesterone will start over again. So it's like a cycle. Yeah, like we have seen in case of menstruation, how it is functional in this term, like here, no, not here, sorry, here, right? So during the proliferative phase, estrogen has to increase, and this increase in turn is induced because here the level is low, so it will activate the luteinizing hormone and the follicle stimulating hormone, and especially the follicle stimulating hormone, because it has to induce the conversion of the primary follicle into the Graafian follicle. So that's why this FSH will cause the activation of the estrogen and secretion ultimately. So then I guess that's what is increased level of FSH during early post-menstrual phase or follicular phase stimulates one.
In the previous statement, when
Huh?
during the menstrual phase, the level of estrogen and progesterone falls considerably.
Hmm.
Sir, it takes, so it falls. It's a span of time, right?
Right, the first 3 to 5 days of the menstrual cycle where the menstrual flow happens.
So, like on the first day, also the estrogen and progesterone will be down, but the FSH and LH will be created on the fifth day.
No, like we always speak of, it's a progression. It's not sudden drop and sudden, except at this 14th day where you see there is a peak and there is sudden drop of estrogen. Otherwise, the rest, all these things, they are progressions. Yeah, the diagram may or may not represent it, but the level of the hormone cannot suddenly rise. Otherwise, it's a shock to the cells. It always goes on slowly. So let's assume it's on the first day of the menstrual cycle, it was very low. On second day, it will be little higher, third day, a little higher, and so on. So it goes on increasing. And actually, you can see it here in case of estradiol, they have shown a gradual increase also. And that is also with respect to the effect of FSH also gradually increasing.
So, the concentrations of progesterone and estrogen, they are the lowest on the first day of menstrual cycle, on the menstrual phase,
Yeah, you can say so.
and they increase afterwards till
Correct.
the. Okay.
Right. Okay, so now this increased level, like obviously the low levels of estrogen and progesterone has induced the secretion of FSH and LH. Now when FSH is increasing during early post-menstrual phase or follicular phase, that is early post-menstrual phase and the follicular phase, that is when the follicle is forming. So this particular phase, which is shown here, follicle stimulating hormone increasing, yeah, this particular part. During that phase, it stimulates one or more primary ovarian follicle. That's the function of FSH, to stimulate the primary ovarian follicle to start growing and ultimately form the Graafian follicle. And this in turn will also stimulate the follicle cells which are present around that primary follicle and secondary follicle to secrete the estrogen. That is the function of the follicular cells, which will be induced by FSH to secrete the estrogen. Then the level of this estrogen in blood will increase gradually. See, here it says for few days, and it's at peak for 14 days, because that's when the ovulation, the Graafian follicle has to be ready and the ovule has to be released from the Graafian follicle, and that is why only the function of estrogen is up to that particular point to induce those meiotic changes in the follicle, and also the follicular cells under the influence of FSH will keep secreting estrogen. So that is why it peaks at the 14th day. The estrogen surge reduces FSH secretion. Now this is the negative feedback. Higher estrogen level, because it's at peak on the 14th day, it will reduce the FSH secretion, and this in turn introduces the LH secretion. So estrogen has increased up to 14th day, right? Then it will cause reduction in the FSH. So FSH will start reducing, and then LH will start increasing. So again, here they are showing overlap, but imagine this is a gap of 24 hours. Yeah. So ideally this phase of the FSH should have been here, and at 14th day, the luteinizing hormone will be at its peak after the FSH day. So, but because now here 24 hours are shown in a very small period of time, so that's why both peak, they seem to match with each other at the same time. But that is not the case. It is what it says here. So the estrogen surge, that means higher level of estrogen, will reduce FSH, and this will in turn introduce the LH surge before the 12 hours. So out of those 24 hours, that 12 hour, like during the 13th day itself, this will start happening, right? That is the like the effect of this negative feedback mechanism of the estrogen surge. Now the LH level in the blood is at its peak. So again, that's towards the let's say at the second half of the 14th day, LH level will be at its peak, and that's what you will see in the diagram also. But again, like I said, the diagram is totally representing here 24 hours. So that's why you see both the peak at the same time. But ideally, FSH will peak, and somewhere near the peak of the FSH, LH will also start rising up. So I hope you are getting that part. And yeah.
The what does it mean by 12 hours, i.e. on 13th day?
Sorry, what does it mean by?
The 12 hours, like the 12 hours thought.
What it means is, like, estrogen is increasing. You see, estrogen starts falling down, right? At this peak, which is, let's say, 13th day,
Oh, yes.
right? Because it is shown before 14. So let's assume this is what 13th day. At this point, FSH will start going down because there is higher level of estrogen. It will show negative feedback mechanism on FSH. FSH will start going down in the 14th day, first 12 hours, right? And during that 14th day, first 12 hours, the LH will start increasing.
Sir, so estrogen when it increases, FSH decreases, right?
Correct.
So shouldn't, like, if estrogen is increasing from the 0 to the 13th day, like thing like that, how it's shown in the graph, wouldn't the like graph of FSH be kind of like a curve? I mean, it's like it won't suddenly, like, why would it suddenly decrease on the 13th day? Like estrogen increase on the other days, right?
Right. So I got your question. So what now what we think of these hormones is like just molecules suddenly present in the blood or in a particular cellular tissue, and they suddenly disappear. That is not the case. What it means is, when a particular hormone is at highest peak, it is completely utilizing all the hormonal receptors which are present on those tissues. Now, there is no more place for those hormonal receptors to accept any more of the hormone, correct? Now, so that will induce a change into the membrane structure of the cell, which induces the other hormone to go down, and that signal is like, now you go down and also cause my level down. So estrogen, when it is at higher level, estrogen has already occupied all the estrogen receptors. Estrogen will send a signal through the membrane of the cell to FSH that please make your level down. FSH will go down, and ultimately, now because of the FSH level, there will be changes in the receptors of the estrogen, and suddenly the estrogen molecules will be free of the receptor, so there will be no more estrogen signal, and that is what is the sudden drop. It is not like those estrogen molecules, they go away somewhere or they disappear or degrade, nothing of that sort. They just dissociate from the receptors. And this is totally, you must have studied those like mechanisms of polarization, hyperpolarization, and repolarization of a cell, right? So this has something to do with all those mechanisms. So there are so many such receptors present at the plasma membrane or cell membrane, and they take part in most of these activities. Yeah, does that clarify your doubt, Pratham?
So, like, I was asking, like,
your volume is low, very low, rather.
now is it okay? I mean, okay, I'll increase it.
Yeah, better.
Yeah. So, like in the diagram, so you can say, so if it's a curve, right? The estrogen level.
Right.
So it's gradually rising up from the 0th to the 13th day. So if you see, the peak is on the 13th day, but on the 12th day also it's pretty high, right?
On 12th day also it is pretty high.
And like on the, like, from, you can say, the 10th to the 13th day, it's high. Like if you see the later half of the curve. So shouldn't it be like towards the later half, like the 10th to the 13th day or something like that? That's the place where the level of LSH gradually goes down. So like it gradually rises and gradually goes down. I mean, it's high before it gradually goes down, like a mirror image of this curve.
Not really. See, that's what I said. So as soon as the action potential of the cell changes, it can immediately allow all the receptors to get free of their ligand. Ligand is estrogen is a ligand, and estrogen receptors where they are going to bind. So the what you are saying is possible in case if they are one by one, like one molecule of estrogen and one molecule of estrogen receptor, if they are acting separately. But that is not the case. It is a group of receptor and group of estrogen molecules that is how they function together. And like I said, when all the receptors they are occupied, until and unless that has not happened, the estrogen will not show any effect on the FSH level to make it down.
Okay, so it's like a critical threshold.
Yeah, kind of. Exactly. That is the word.
Okay. Like,
and also it is
neutralization reaction.
Yeah, it is also not just the binding of the receptor. It also matters how much of the free estrogen molecules are present in the surrounding area. And that also in turn affect the level. So that's how all these mechanisms work. Actually, you don't have those molecular mechanisms. Otherwise, they are far more interesting than what we are learning here. This is very superficial that we are seeing. But that particular, like you must have heard of some cyclic AMP pathway or kinase pathway where phosphorylation of the protein happens, then it opens up certain gates or channels, then certain ions will transfer inside or outside of the cell, and that changes the action potential, that changes the protein structure. So ultimately protein structure is nothing but the receptors. So if the receptor is changing their structure, the estrogen which was binding to it, because of the change in structure of the receptor, the ligand has to go away. That means the estrogen has to go away because it no more can bind to the receptor. And this is how it functions. Okay, I hope that was that part was clear. Yeah, so and LH, that is the luteinizing hormone, will cause the ovulation, also called as the ovulating hormone, and will maintain the corpus luteum starting from its formation till it becomes corpus albicans. That is, it will also maintain the progesterone level, and once it becomes corpus albicans, it will be no like very less of progesterone. That will be the basal level. Yeah. Yeah, most important thing, the level goes down of these hormone doesn't mean they go to zero. There will always be some basal level. Like let's say if you plot a graph from y-axis, that is from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's say the basal level is at 2. So it will be always maintained parallel to x-axis on 2. That's what is being shown here. Like here, if you see, ideally this would be 0. That is the y-axis and x-axis, right? The level of estrogen and progesterone should ideally start from this corner, but it doesn't, because there is always certain basal level of this hormone, which is at any given time point in the body will always be having this much amount of estrogen or progesterone. And that's why they are starting a little above x-axis and they are maintained kind of parallel for a while, so that it doesn't go to 0 at all. If it goes to 0, that means there is certain problem with that particular individual. Okay, so again, I will just quickly explain this diagram. Hypothalamus is responsible for secretion of this gonadotropin releasing hormone. That means your luteinizing hormone releasing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone releasing hormone. Yeah, so these are the two gonadotropin releasing hormones, which in turn will act on the adenohypophysis or the anterior pituitary, will secrete LH and FSH, which will act on the ovary to secrete estrogen and progesterone, and they have different actions. Now, when there are higher levels of estrogen and progesterone, they will in turn act on these, both of these, that is hypothalamus as well as pituitary gland, and they can block the secretion. Usually it is the like progesterone, low estrogen. This is one of the condition in body where there is little more of progesterone and low level of estrogen. But again, we need not go into that part. It specifically is referring to this part where the progesterone is high and the estrogen is low. That's when this level go back to the normal, and then they will again stimulate this estrogen secretion through FSH and so on. So that is what it means. But like I said, we need not go there as of now. And plus, obviously, they have positive feedback mechanism. The moment there is a little bit of these hormones, the ovary will send a signal to hypothalamus and also to pituitary gland, because they are connected through different nerves, and that will in turn act as the stimulator, and then that can cause the secretion of this hormone. Same thing is being explained here also in terms of what are the functions. This you can go over. The positive and negative things just represent, that is the positive feedback mechanism, and the other one is negative feedback mechanism. Simplistically, all this put together in this diagram, which also shows kind of the summary of the menstrual cycle in terms of what are the effects of those hormones. So starting with the menstrual phase, now progesterone is withdrawn. Obviously, before the menses start, the progesterone is become like the corpus luteum has become corpus albicans. So progesterone level is almost going towards the vessel, and the luteal regression happens. That is what is luteal regression. That is from luteum to the albicans. That is the luteal regression. Then the menses start from first day to fifth day. This will end up into the follicular phase, that is also called proliferative phase, where the increase in FSH and LH will cause increase in the level of estrogen, and the follicular development happens. That is from 6th day to 13th day. Then the ovulatory phase where the LH and FSH, they are at peak, but just with a difference, like I explained earlier, not at the same time. First FSH is at peak and then LH is at peak, which will cause the release of the oocyte exactly on the 14th day, that is the ovulation, which will enter into the luteal phase where progesterone becomes high because LH will induce the formation of corpus luteum. That is, after the oocyte is released, that those follicular cells, they will convert into those golden yellow corpus luteal cells. Progesterone will be secreted by them, and then this happens from 15th day to 21st day, and then again the same cycle starts happening. So this is just the summary with respect to the hormonal control and their actions in terms of the menstrual cycle. Okay, now do you have any question here, like any of these facts that we've seen up till now? Yes.
If you go back to the previous slide, the written one,
Huh?
before, so there was something about synergids. Yeah,
Oh, yeah. So FSH and LH acts as synergies. That means whenever one level goes high, the other also goes high. When one level goes down, the other one also goes down. And that's how they will act as synergists. Synergists means, like we had seen in this diagram, like usually the one is increasing, the other one is also increasing, but because of the effect of the subsidiary hormones, that is the estrogen and so on, and also because of the structural differences in the endometrium, they will be acting in synergy with each other. Yeah, that is in sync, in short. Like there, it's not always that one goes high and the other one goes high and the other goes low and the second hormone also goes low. They act in combination together. You know what symbiosis is, right? Like kind of helping each other in terms of growth. So this is something similar. Synergist refers to helping one hormone in the action of the other hormone. So that's what is synergy here.
So, on the 14th day, in the first 12 hours, FSH is high,
right,
and LH is low.
huh?
Estrogen converts.
LH is not low there. If you see, LH has already started. You remember, estrogen is increasing, right? And if you look here, estrogen, if it is higher, it can in turn stimulate this gonadotropin releasing hormone. High estrogen will stimulate this, right? So it will cause the secretion of LH and FSH. So it's again a gradual increase. It doesn't start only on 13th day.
So, but estrogen is decreasing FSH, right?
Estrogen is decreasing FSH when it is at its peak. I told you this receptor blocking mechanism or receptor occupancy, like what you said, that critical threshold. Up till that critical threshold, it will not block. So after that, it will.
Okay. So you divided into the first 12 hours and the second 12 hours, right? So LH peaks on the second 12 hours.
LH will, yes, peak is, but the gradual increase is still there, right? Up to the peak. What is the question?
No, I'm just confirming. So in the first 12 hours, FSH will peak, and in the second 12 hours, LH will peak. That's right, right?
FSH will not actually, yeah, yes, that's right, but FSH may not peak as such. FSH peak will be somewhere at the end of 13th day, not at the first half of the 14th day. Did you get what I said?
So okay, so the second half of
maybe we will draw this on the board. This might be little more. Oh, there are already too many flowers drawn there. Wait, I'll just quickly draw this. because the diagram might be confusing there. So let's say now I am drawing. You can see only here. So let's say this is the x-axis where we are showing 11th, 12th, 13th, and 14th. I hope they are equal. Now, estrogen level is at peak somewhere here after 30. Now let me draw these lines so you will understand that part. Now, let's say estrogen level will be and this will be 14th day. That means here it will be. So let's say this is the first half of 40 and this is the second half of 40. Right? Now, when the level is going high of estrogen, let's say from here, it will be high here. Right? Now, and then it will start going down. Now, where it goes, that doesn't matter. Yeah, this is the peak of the estrogen. Yeah, I'm just writing E. So this is the peak of estrogen, which is before 14 weeks. Now, when this is at peak, it will cause FSH. Now, again from FSH, wherever it comes from, let's say it was only this level. The peak will be here. Yeah, and then it will go. And as soon as this you see, the LH will be at peak. Let's say it is going this much. It will, and then it may continue. So this is your LH. This is your FSH. So that's how the peaks will be. As estrogen is at peak, it will cause FSH to go down, and there will always be a gap between these. So ideally, you would imagine it should go down from this phase itself because this is at peak. No, but because there is a receptor mechanism, it will always take certain amount of time, which is hardly a matter of like sometimes few minutes to few hours, not surely half day or 1 day. So that's why you see this difference in the peaks of these three hormones. Yeah, did you get what I said now?
Sir, so the level of FSH is highest on the midnight, at midnight on the 13th day.
Level of FSH is highest, correct, right? So that's when the statement or the diagram that was shown, it showed on 14th day, both these peaks, they are at highest. But that doesn't mean they are highest at the same time on the 14th day. They are highest on the same day, that is correct. But this will be highest first, and then this will be highest one, that is LH and FSH. Different. I hope you understood it, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay, then we will. We have time, right? Yes, we have enough time. So, yeah. So I will skip whole of this again. No revision there. So again, these two terminologies, which is menarche and menopause. Now, on attaining the puberty, the appearance of first menstrual flow in the life of a girl is called menarche. Usually it occurs 11 to 13 years, that we know. We just have to familiarize ourselves with this term. Like start of the menstrual cycle is called as menarche, and the permanent stoppage or cessation of the menstrual cycle in a woman is called menopause. This again we know. The age is usually 45 to 50 years, like we had discussed earlier as well. Now, the primordial follicle of the ovary fails to respond during the menopause. This primordial follicle, that is the follicle which was generated, like let's say during the puberty time, there will be certain follicles. Those follicles, they will fail to respond the pituitary gonadotropin, and this is again like a hormonal change. It is not just the of course the cells, they would have been utilized. There is enough of cells, wear and tear. The nervous stimulus gets weakened over the later phases of life. the cellular response get weakened over the later phases of life. So the cumulative effect of all of this will be these follicular cells or the primordial follicles of the ovary, they will fail to respond to the gonadotropins, so that the Graafian follicle will not form. Now again, if this follicle is not forming, so obviously whole of that cycle gets messed up, no hormones get secreted, and even the feedback mechanism, they stop functioning over the time. So ovulation does not occur, the woman does not attain the pregnancy after coitus. There are few cases, like if it is a natural menopause and like due to certain injections of the hormones, the pregnancy kind of situation has been induced into the body. But again, that's like I said, it is risky thing, because these hormones, they don't have just one effect, they have thousands of effect in our body, and that way it can also be dangerous. But otherwise, in natural scenario, in the menopause, the hormones, they stop functioning after a certain time. So that is what is the menarche and the menopause. Would you have any question here? I assume no, because it's a simpler thing, nothing more to understand there. But yeah, if you have any question, you can ask. If not, at least I will start with this fertilization process. So now again, we had seen the whole of the development of the reproductive structures, the gamete formation process. Now this is the B day for the whole of the reproduction thing, that is fertilization. The fusion of the haploid male and female gamete, that is sperm and ovum, is fertilization. Now, most important fact, we assume the fertilization, like the common layman, they would assume the fertilization happens in the either vagina or cervix or uterus, but that is not the case. It happens in the ampulla isthmus junction of the fallopian tube. Now, I hope you remember where is ampulla, where is isthmus. So there was fimri next to ovary, then it was the elongated and what is widened tubular structure, that was ampulla, and isthmus was closer to the uterus, like when you go from fimri or fallopian tube along the path. So that is the ampulla isthmus junction, and that is where the fusion of these gametes happen. Now, fertilization is again divided into several of these stages, that is insemination, movement of sperm. So after the sexual intercourse, the sperms will be deposited into the female genital tract. Then from those released sperm, they will start moving upwards. Then the arrival of the ovum, that is on the 14th day, the ovum will be, the oocyte will be released on the 14th day. That is what is arrival of the ovum. Capacitation of the sperm. Now this is one of the very interesting phenomena that happens with respect to sperm, where the sperm has to be kind of layer wise removed into the original nucleus and whatever machineries is present inside. We'll see that part as well. And then at the end, the fusion of gametes. Now fusion of gamete is again subdivided into acrosomal reaction. Now we know acrosome was one of the like front part of the sperm. There is some reaction with respect to acrosome. Then the sperm entry inside the ovum. Cortical reaction, that is the cortex of these ova structure, undergoes certain reactions. Activation of the egg, that is the completion of the meiosis process. And then finally the amphimixis or karyogamy, that is the fusion of these two nuclei. So that like this long is the process of fertilization. Now going over one by one. Obviously, first few processes, they are very simple. The more complicated ones are here in the capacitation and the fusion of gamete. The rest are very easy. So insemination, now during copulation or coitus or sexual intercourse, the male would discharge 3 to 4 ml of the semen into the vagina of the female. Now this is again dependent on individuals, but on an average in healthy individuals, this is the case. And this is called either ejaculation or also known as insemination. Insemination, you know, the deposition of sperm into the female genital tract. So that is insemination. And we know this fact also. A single ejaculate will contain 200 to 300 million sperms, and only few are able to reach the fallopian tube. And why that is the case? Because large number of sperms get killed by the acidity of the female genital tract, and many are engulfed by the leukocytes of the vaginal epithelium. Now, this is something to correlate with your natural selection or the survival of the fetus, right? One which is stronger and better in terms of the adaptation, better in terms of characteristic, physical characteristic or internal characteristic, they will survive for longer time, and they are able to produce healthy individuals. So that's a general phenomena of the survival of the fetus and natural selection. So that's the same process that happens with respect to these sperms, and only few are able to reach the fallopian tube. Those who are very good healthy sperms, they reach the fallopian tube. Then the second stage, that is the movement of sperm. Now in this, the sperms, they will swim towards the fallopian tube. Swim doesn't mean literally they swim, but they move towards the fallopian tube by lashing moment of their tail. Lashing moment is nothing but it's like a whip like movement of the tail, like how a snake moves, something like that. So that is the lashing moment of their tail, and at the speed of 1 to 4 mm per minute. Imagine how slow they are. 1 to 4 mm that per minute, but of course their size is also in few tens of micrometer, or let's say 10 micrometer or so. So for them this would be like almost 1,000 times of their size. So that way they are moving, but according to human like movement, this is like kind of very slow movement. So they move 1 to 4 mm per minute. Now the aspiratory action of the uterus, aspiratory action as in like kind of like sucking in moment, that is aspiration, or taking it inside, that is the aspiration moment. And the peristaltic movements of the fallopian tube will propel the sperm upwards. Because it's a smooth muscle structure, they will undergo peristaltic movement like it happens in stomach and intestine, something similar. So whatever content of these cervix, uterus and the fallopian tube is there, it will keep moving upward in the sense towards the fallopian tube. These movements, they are initiated by hormone oxytocin. Now this is one of the another hormone which gets secreted during the menstrual cycle, usually before the ovulation day, that is before somewhere on 13th day or so, at the end of 13th day. And it will cause it will like allow this peristaltic movement of the uterus and also of the fallopian tube to increase a bit, so that they can fasten the movement of the sperm. And like this is released during the copulation, and also by the local action of the prostaglandin present in the same. So two things that which cause the movement of the sperm is, one is oxytocin and second one is prostaglandin. Prostaglandin is already present in the seminal vesicle fluid, right? So it was already present in the semen of that male individual which is inseminated into the genital tract of a female. So both of these in combination, they will cause this upward movement of the sperm. So that is the movement of the sperm. In addition, though the a sperm can survive inside a female genital tract for 1 to 3 days. So the viability of the sperm is usually 1 to 3 days, and it can fertilize the oocyte only within 12 to 24 hours of their release. That doesn't mean that sperm, even though if it is staying in the female reproductive structure for let's say 3 days, that doesn't mean there is higher possibility of fertilization. No, the possibility of fertilization is still within those first 24 hours of the release of the oocytes. So that is the like general. Same is the case with the oocyte also, which we'll see in the arrival of the ovum. That is the third stage of the fertilization. Now ovum released by the rupture of the Graafian follicle trickles down the fallopian tube. Graafian follicle has the secondary oocyte which will be released and which will trickle down the fallopian tube and is received by the fimbriae of the fallopian tube. These structures we have seen already, so I won't go much detail here. So in human female, ovulation occurs at the secondary oocyte stage, and like I had said earlier also, we have general misconception that complete ovum, which is completely meiotically divided, that is released. That is not the case. But at a particular metaphase 2 of the meiosis, this secondary oocyte will be released, and the second maturation division, that is the meiosis 2, is yet to happen completely. So the ovum, which is surrounded by the follicle cells, now obviously the secondary oocyte has certain follicular cells surrounding it that are glued together. That means they are arranged together with hyaluronic acid. Like, you know, there is corona radiata, which is part of the follicular cells. It's like it is differentiated follicular cells in short, and in between those cells, this hyaluronic acid is like acting like a cementing material. That means it is allowing the two cells to stick together. So in between the cell gap, there will always be this hyaluronic acid present in the corona radiata layer, which is around the secondary oocyte. And oocyte can also survive for 3 days, that is 72 hours, but can only get fertilized in the first 24 hours after ovulation. Yeah, so that is the arrival of the ovum. I guess we will stop here. We will start with the capacitation of the sperm and the rest of the fertilization in the next class. Today is Friday. Yeah, good. That reminds me, if you have any question you can ask, but let me